While you eat your lunch, I will hold a little presentation with the title you can see on the screen. And I will start by asking, why do people get so angry? And then I will proceed, why does it matter to any of us, to regulators, policymakers, the industry, and ordinary citizens? And third, I will ask, why do we use choice experiments in RenewHydro, and what is it? And finally, I will ask, what will our PhD students do, and how can you help them? Some words about myself, that is, Juliet has already presented me. But if you got to know me a little bit closer, you will find out that I lived 24 years in Leikanger, a small town in Indre Sogn, in the heart of what we may call the hydropower land. And during this period, I was a board member in the power-intensive industry, Thunder Wheels. And so I understand the need for low and stable electricity prices. I was also a board member in a power company, SFE, and so I understand the need for high electricity prices. And I have friends in Leikanger, and around 5 to 10 years ago, it was a heated debate on whether or not we should build Leikanger Kraftverk, a quite large hydropower plant. So I do know from personal experience the pros and cons of hydropower development, and it is these dilemmas that social acceptance can help us deal with. So why do people get so angry? Learning from Norwegian history, we have a long and proud tradition in energy management. From we developed hydropower around 1900 to oil and gas discovery in the North Sea in the 1970s. And we have made sure that we have national control over these resources. We have, for instance, grunnrenteskatt, taxation on super profits from hydropower, oil and gas. We have made sure that the progress when it comes to oil and gas development has been gradual, so we can learn as we proceed. We have developed an oil fund so that the profit we earn is saved for future generations. We have made sure that we have ownership of the critical infrastructure hydropower. And we have also been among the first in the world to develop an efficient power market. So you may say, look to Norway. But we had significant conflicts in the 70s and 80s of a large hydropower project, as you see an example on the right-hand side. And then it was relative calm until onshore wind power development began, triggering research on social acceptance. The conflicts around onshore wind power I followed closely from around 2015 and onwards, because then wind power on land escalated. And in fact, in 2020, Norway was among 5 countries in the world installing most wind power on land in the world. So, of course, this triggered a lot of responses, and the government gave a full stop to granting more licenses in April 2019. And this full stop lasted for 3 years. Based on research, I believe the key drivers of this conflict was the speed of the development and also the scale of the projects, the height of the turbines, the area that was developed as well, and also lack of national control. And when it comes to the third bullet points here, we found that people in Norway strongly prefer that we have national or local ownership over the wind power and not international. And at this time, 70% of wind power was owned by international investors, something we were not used to. Also, we found that people strongly prefer that the argument for developing this wind power was to benefit national and local problems, challenges that we had to solve, and not to export it to Europe. The government responded to this conflict by making a lot of changes in regulations and policies, but you all only get one chance to give a first impression. And so, still today, only 43% of Norwegians are positive towards wind farms, which is among the lowest in Europe. And furthermore, Norwegians have become so skeptic to wind power on land that they actually today prefer any other technology, all else equal, to wind power on land, including hydropower, but also nuclear power and solar power. So why does this matter? Why does social acceptance matter? You may take a pragmatic view and say it's the smart thing to do. Lack of social support can severely hamper the introduction of innovative green technologies. Or you may, as we do in the book to the right, take a more ethical perspective and say that it's the right thing to do to achieve sustainable development. We must ensure social justice, and this includes ensuring fair processes and outcomes. And finally, if you are an economist like myself, you may say that it maximizes social welfare. It creates value for society. Setting a price on attributes, for instance, that people value, like nature and a balanced climate, will result in a better allocation of scarce resources. That is, we are able to bake the largest cake with the available resources. So some people say that societal legitimacy is a better term than social acceptance. And that is because the critics argue that when we talk about social acceptance, we typically take a more pragmatic view. We think about the resistance as a problem to be solved, to be overcome, and also that the focus is much more on concrete projects or developments and not on the frameworks that regulate this sector, like the institutions, the laws, the taxes, the subsidies, how we in a way build the framework for this development. And I can agree that that might be a better term, but this also depends on the method you use. And as you will see, the method we use is perhaps not about social acceptance at all or societal legitimacy, but more about the preferences people had. Then they are forced to choose among two different developments, for instance. They may possibly dislike both of them, but being forced to choose, they think option A is better than option B. So it's more about dilemmas that we face all the time, which is important when you talk about social acceptance. Also, I would like to say, as we do in our book, that's a development that everyone agrees on, but that does not respect environmental limits, is not sustainable. So the research we do on social acceptance is important, but we need researchers like natural scientists from Nina, who can also bring attention to the real impacts on nature. We need both. The third question is, why do we use discrete choice experiments? And I could start by saying that this is grounded in economics. But I will start by presenting to you a more intuitive example, like choosing an ice cream when you go into a shop. Perhaps you prefer the flavor of the strawberry ice cream, but you see that the ice cream milkshake to the left bottom, it's made by a local brand that you approve of. And finally, looking at the banana split, you find that that's the option of the week, and it has a discount of 50%. So you don't know exactly which one to choose because they have different pros and cons, but you make up your mind and you go out of the shop with the chocolate ice cream. So more formally, an individual chooses the option that gives them the highest satisfaction among a set of alternatives. And the demand for goods is derived from the demand of these attributes. Each alternative is described by a set of attributes, for instance, the flavor. And each attribute has different levels. So that can be chocolate, strawberry, or vanilla flavor. The problem that the choice experiments can handle is that markets often fail to put a price on all the attributes that they value. And this is particularly true for environmental goods, such as clean air, biodiversity, a stable climate, or landscapes that we enjoy. And these assets or attributes can be difficult to price because they are what we call public goods. We cannot exclude anyone from breathing the clean air, for instance, or because the impact often falls on people outside the transaction between the buyer and the seller, creating what we call externalities. But there are also other important non-market attributes, such as flood protection, that you create jobs, whether the hydropower is owned by a local municipality or the state, and energy security. And all these non-market attributes also shape our preferences. To explain a bit further, I show an example of a choice card. This was in a survey where we wanted to understand people's opinions when it came to the government's goal to build more offshore wind. And we had, as you see, we described these future developments with 5 what we call attributes: location, ownership, intended use, turbine height, and electricity bill. And then you see in black text that alternative A and alternative B differs when it comes to these levels. So you might think that alternative B is the best because it has a location offshore, and most people we find from previous research prefer that we put wind power far off the shore, so you can hardly see it. But on the other hand, if you look at alternative A, you see that the intended use or the argument for building all this wind power is to stimulate local activity, and that you prefer more strongly than exporting it to EU, for instance. So these choices are made difficult on purpose. And the respondents, they get, let's say, 8 such choice cards. And for each choice card, they had to tick off either alternative A or alternative B. The reason why we put the impact on the electricity bill or a cost attribute at the bottom is because this attribute enables us through statistical analysis to calculate the willingness to pay for instance, an environmental improvement. And this information is easier to discuss with politicians and you than, for instance, the concept marginal utility. So here you see the result of a statistical estimation based on that choice card you just saw. And this statistical estimation shows a lot of numbers, and the numbers are the willingness to pay something extra each month to achieve what you think is an improvement. So we found that Norwegians, on average, were willing to pay almost 500 kroner each month to shift ownership dominance from international to local owners, all else being equal to a reference. And why is this method useful? And can we trust these numbers? I think the most useful aspect of these surveys or experiments is that we are able to rank the different attributes. Here we found out that, in fact, Norwegians were particularly concerned about ownership. And how can we use that? Perhaps we could change the regulation or the taxation so that people felt that, okay, we do have still international investors, but we have made sure that part of the super profit they earn is shared with the Norwegian society. Or we do have stricter regulation, so these international investors, they come and contribute, but they are regulated more strongly. And we also found that later on, Norwegian power companies, in fact, started to invest more in wind power, perhaps understanding that Norwegian ownership was important. Well, I didn't answer, can we trust these numbers? Yes, I think it all depends on how we have formulated this questionnaire. And here you will have to help us. We can also not make it too complicated, because if we have, like, let's say 10 different attributes that vary all at the same time, people will have problems understanding this complexity, and they will have problems to make wise decisions. So it all depends that we have a good design that reflects real dilemmas. But also, I think the most important output from these choice experiments is that they help us ranking the different aspects of a development. So what projects should we study? I know that many of you want us to focus on planned projects, realistic projects, because they feel more credible and easy for people to relate to, and they are useful when decision is right just around the corner, and results can help you guide project designs and communication. But also, we might sometimes use hypothetical projects because it enables us to control all details. So it can be good for testing future options and new ideas, and they're very flexible. And finally, we often end up with a hybrid project, drawing on both realistic planned projects and more hypothetical details. So back to this, does experiments contribute to sustainability? I think yes, when it comes to the pragmatic perspective, but used like this, it can also be misused. When it comes to the ethical, partly, this experiment focuses on what the average citizen prefer, may overlook marginalized groups like the Sami people, and knowledge on environmental limits. And maximizing social welfare, yes, it fits very nicely to this perspective and illustrates that taking social acceptance into consideration improves social welfare, or what we call in Norwegian verdiskapning. Finally, what will our PhD do and how can you help? Here you see our three PhD scholars, Ida, Anna and Solveig. Ida and Anna they started in the autumn, in September, and Solveig, she has just started. And then I added Binod because he's part of the FME Solar and will use exactly the same method looking at social acceptance for solar power. Just to take the ideas to two of these students, Ida, and you see her email address here if you want to contact her. She will look at the hydropower's role in the context of EU policy, market dynamics, and technology change. That's the focus in Framework Program 4. And they have been discussing that perhaps she should look into this Alterna Future report that the FME Hydrosen made some years ago, and they represent different scenarios for hydropower with very different pros and cons when it comes to nature and energy flexibility, energy production, and whether it's profitable. And so we need your feedback on whether this is a good idea, whether it has come up, whether these scenarios have been improved after they first presented some years ago, and how we can pick sensible attributes from this report. So please contact her if you have good ideas. And then Anna, she's part of Research Program 3, and you can also contact her on the red email. And she will look into hydropower's role in adapting to a changing climate. And here we have discussed that the Stortingsmelding 27, the white paper 27, can be a good starting point, because this report allows hydropower in protected rivers if societal gains, for instance, flood protection, is substantially better or outweighs environmental costs. And this will be a highly debated issue in the time to come. And we think that it would be wise to dig a little bit into the dilemmas confronting this. She has been looking into a case in Lærdal, and perhaps she will widen this scope to also include a group of similar projects. So finally, how can you help? Here you see the 7 steps that the students go through. We will start now right away with interviewing researchers and stakeholders in RenewHydro to improve their attributes. And here you can be of good help. But of course, it's not only important to have a project that reflects the reality that you as experts see. They must also be understood by ordinary citizens. So step 2 is to check out the survey on ordinary citizens. Then they will complete the survey and experiment design and hand it over to a professional survey company. A month later or so, they receive a file with responses for a subset. No. Much earlier, they receive responses for a small subset of the sample, and they can make corrections based on that subset. Then the full sample or the full survey is sent out to, let's say, 2,000 inhabitants in Norway, and we will receive responses from them. Finally, they will take this file and use a very sophisticated statistical procedure to analyze the responses. And then they will come back to you and say what they have found and to get your help to find possible, plausible explanations for the patterns that they reveal. So this was my presentation. I don't know if I used 20 minutes or approximately that, but thank you for paying attention to my presentation, and I'm very happy to get your comments.
Thank you very much, Kristin, for the interesting and informative presentation. And as you said, if someone has some questions, we do have time for that as well.